Last week we used these signs, and I used them to talk a little bit about the passage we moved into in Jeremiah. There was people living in exile. So if this is real quick, this is the 3-minute version of my sermon last week, which some of you, whenever I do that, think, why didn't you do the 3-minute version last week? But here's the 3-minute version this week. Jeremiah was talking to a people who were promised a land, a home in the past. They were promised that home. And in the present where they were living, they had lived away from God, and so they were in exile. They were away from home, and so they were longing to be home where God had called them, where God said he promised that he would be there. Jeremiah, at the beginning of Jeremiah, makes this statement to us that he has to live this life of exile, even though he is still in Jerusalem. And exile is this terrible place, a place we don't want to be. And the passage we looked at in Jeremiah chapter 29 is a reminder to us that even though when we live in exile that God is present, that we make our home there, that we live there. And God says to the people there, not only do you make your home there, you have children there. And then I didn't really talk about this last week, but he also makes the statement, not only do you have kids there, prepare to have grandchildren there. This is a generational thing that you're going to be in. And so that's where we were last week. This week we continue in, and we are in the book of Daniel. And I know for some of us, it's Advent. And so Advent is a time that we talk about Mary, we talk about angels, we talk about Joseph, we talk about babies, whether it's John or Jesus. We're going to get there. But today we are in the book of Daniel. We're going to talk about the story of the fiery furnace. And for a lot of us, we're thinking, Pastor, this is not an Advent passage. Exile is not an Advent passage. Where we are picking up this story, last week in the story, we were all the way back in, let me get my dates right, make sure I tell them to you correctly. We were all the way back in 598 BC. Just a little while after that, 587, Jerusalem is destroyed. That was Jeremiah. We fast forward the story some 433 years to 165 BC, and here we are in the book of Daniel. We are still in exile. This has been a generational exile. We're still in Babylon. We're still here, longing for here, right? But here we are. So the question still remains, how do we live in exile? Now, here's the deal that I want you to hear kind of starting off today. This feels weird for Advent, to be talking about exile. It feels like a strange place to be on the first Sunday of Advent. However, if we sang a Christmas song this morning that every single one of us knows, we would sing about exile and not one of you would think a thing about it. If we sang these words together, which I'm not going to sing, O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns where? In lonely exile here. Until what? The Son of God appears. This is a story about exile. This is a story about a people longing to see God appear. It is a story, even in the fiery furnace, is a story that fits very, very well into our proper understanding of what Advent is. Advent is the story of a people longing in exile to see God appear in their midst. That's what we want. It's what we're hopeful for. As we move through Advent and as the candles get brighter and brighter, as more and more of them are lit, we are reminded every single week of an increasing of God's presence among us. That's what Advent is about. So, if that's what Advent is about, let's do a little bit of history as we've talked about exile last week. Over here, if you remember, the other side of this sign is from an old sermon. In the past, we have knowledge of what? Or history. We have knowledge of how God has acted. All right? That's what we talked about a long time ago with that sermon. So kind of going along with that, let's talk a little bit about our knowledge of who God is and how God has acted. All right? Let's go back to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20 is one of those passages that hopefully quite a few of you know what is in Exodus 20. Anybody know what we find in Exodus 20? Maybe I shouldn't ask. The Ten Commandments, very good. All right, so the Ten Commandments. This is the beginning of the Ten Commandments. So God spoke all these words. Verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. History, knowledge of what God has done. Do not have other gods besides me. Do not make an idol for yourself, whether in the shape of anything in the heavens or above or on the earth below or in the waters under the sea. Do not bow and worship to them and do not serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, bringing the consequences of your father's iniquity on the children to a third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. These are what we would call the first two commandments in the Ten Commandments. That's our understanding. But let me just kind of throw this out there because I want you to hear it because I think it's an important thing that informs our text. As Christians, we have the Ten Commandments. But the Jewish people, they see the Ten Commandments a little bit differently than we do. For them, it's the exact same text, exact same words, they just number them differently. Some of you, as I talk about this, are going to think, well, how can you have 10 if they've added one to the front? It's because at the end, they add two of them together. That's how they get there. But let's walk through this because I want you to be thinking about it. So in traditional Jewish writing, the Ten Commandments are numbered differently than we would number them, and they kind of add, and I say add quotation marks because the words are there. They don't make up something, it's there. But they would start with the very first commandment in the Ten Commandments. It's what we just read. I am the Lord your God. History, knowledge. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a place of slavery. For the Jewish people, the Ten Commandments do not begin with something we don't do. The Ten Commandments begin with relationship. I am your God. They begin with history. This is what I have done for you. They also continue with a future, because when God spoke to them at this time, they had not moved to that land. They were moving out of slavery into a new land. He's bringing them out of slavery, but he's bringing them to a new land, to home. So the Jewish Ten Commandments begin with relationship. And then we would move into the second commandment, do not have other gods besides me. Commandment number 3, do not make yourself an idol. And then you can kind of walk through the commandments. Traditionally, in the Christian church, we start with have no other gods beside me as number 1. Do not make for yourself an idol, or if you grew up like I did in the King James Version, do not have a graven image. And number 3, then do not take the Lord's name in vain, or do not misuse the name of the Lord our God. So today, for the sake of the sermon, when I refer to the first two commandments, I'm talking about the Christian version. But I wanted you to hear the Jewish version because they inform the passage we are looking at. All right, so I want you to hear both. Does that make sense? All right, I'll be honest, the Jewish version is a little bit better because I like the relationship piece because y'all know me. I like that piece. But that's not our traditional understanding. So, okay, let's jump into Daniel chapter 3. So Daniel chapter 3, we are still in Babylon. We have King Nebuchadnezzar. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Now, before we go any farther, I need to take a moment to kind of explain what's going on in this text, because most of us, we might have learned this in Sunday school, or we learned this text growing up, and we miss kind of the nuance of what's going on. They are living under oppression. The writer, if Daniel is the writer, and we believe he was, Daniel is living in a time of oppression when the government is upon them, when they are living in exile. And when you are living in oppression, when you are living in exile, one of the things you do is if you write, one of the best ways to deal with oppression and to deal with fear is to make fun of it. It's humor. Humor is what they do in order to deal with it. Now, this is something that we do in our own society. You can Google and you can look for hours. But we all know that there are political cartoons that help deal with some of these things. So I put up here some political cartoons. I tried to find some that wouldn't offend anyone, but the one in the very top left, I put that one there because this is one of the oldest, one of the most famous. It has been duplicated time and time again with different people, but this is the original, which is a man named Napoleon Bonaparte, and then the prime minister of the time of England, and they are carving up the world, separating who gets what part of the world, all right? It's a very, very old political cartoon. The one over the join or die, that's Benjamin Franklin. That was the first political cartoon in America. And his statement there being that we must join as colonies in order to fight against English oppression, because England, with their friend Napoleon, were dividing up the world. We were part of that division. So Ben Franklin responds of each one of those. You can see the states there that need to join together. Going down is another older, I won't say how, it's from the 60s, but back when we were putting a whole lot of money as the United States into the space program in order to get to the moon. And so there we are putting all this, and then over there, there's Russia deciding, yeah, we're out. We don't have that kind of money. And then the other one, this is the 2018 midterms, just Twister with an elephant and a donkey. So why do I put those up there? The reason I put them up there is part of political cartoons are exaggeration. Things are exaggerated. Things are made to be funny. In this story, we've only covered one verse, and this first verse already is kind of bringing in that satire, bringing in that aspect of a political cartoon. All right, if you look up King Nebuchadnezzar, I found a couple pictures here. Obviously, these are artists rendering, but the left one is one of just kind of what somebody thinks he might have looked like. The one next to him, this is the statue that they think the statue might have looked like. Looks very good. He looks kind of scary, doesn't he, is the statue? Here's the problem. This statue and this poor guy who made this, and he posted online, and I saw a little thing. He's like, I did such a good job. Actually, he did not do a very good job. Sorry if you happen to see this. Because the dimensions are all out of whack. All out of whack. So if you were to take this statue and you were to make it 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, this is what the statue would look like. Okay? It's silliness. It's not proportional. It doesn't work. And so we're reading this text, and so I want you today, when we hear this text, to hear it in its humor. It is supposed to be funny. This is a humorous passage, all right? So let's continue on. Verse 2. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to attend the dedication of the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue the king had set up. Then they stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Are you hearing the repetition? A herald loudly proclaimed, "People of every nation and every language, you are commanded. When you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music, you are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." Didn't they do a good job? That was without that. We didn't practice that. All right. But whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and every kind of music, people of every nation fell down and worshiped the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Some Chaldeans took this occasion to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. You, as the king, have issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. There were some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Then, in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will be immediately thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? My power. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, you aren't worth an answer. We don't have to answer your question. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he can rescue us from the power that you have too. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden statues you have set up. Even if our God doesn't show up, we're still not worshiping you. Then Nebuchadnezzar was ticked off. That's my translation. Was filled with rage. And the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary. And he commanded some of the best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So these men, in their trousers, in their robes, head coverings, and their other clothes, were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm and he said to his advisors, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, your majesty, they replied to the king. He exclaimed, look, I see 4 men, none of which are bound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and called, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair on their heads was singed, their robes were unaffected, and there was not even the smell of fire on them. Which, growing up around a campfire, that's a miracle in itself. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own. Therefore, I issue a decree, my second decree, that anyone of any nation, people, nation, or language that says anything offensive against this God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, will be torn limb from limb and his house made a garbage dump. There is no other God who is able to deliver like this. Verse 30. Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So here's the question of the text. What do we do? What do we do when we are no longer allowed to keep the first 2 commandments? To have no other gods before me. to have no idols or graven images. What do we do in those moments? I think the answer, simply, is that we come to a place where we realize that we are so steadfast in our relationship with the living God that nothing, not even the threat of death, can touch my conviction. That we hear the Ten Commandments not simply as things that we don't do, but we hear the first commandment in the Jewish world that says, I am your God. I am the one who delivers. I am the one who brings you out of slavery. I am the one who provides a home for you. I am the one who provides a place for you. And because of that, there is no other God to bow to. Because of that, there is no image worth giving up this relationship for. Because it is the most important thing in the world to know that there is a God. So what do we do? What do we do when we are no longer allowed to keep the first two commandments? When we're told that we can't worship the Lord our God and that we must bow down to something else? Daniel 3, in his own way, gives us a picture as somewhat of a political cartoon. To become so rooted, so steadfast, so anchored in a relationship with the living God that nothing, not even the threat of death itself, sways what we believe. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't know how their story would go, and that's part of what I love about this story. They didn't know if God would deliver them. But what they did know was who God was. Their faith wasn't built on outcomes, but their faith was built on loyalty to a God who says, I am your God. And that's when the miracle of the story takes place. When they're pushed into the furnace, into a place that no faithful person should ever have to stand, and there's a fourth person in the fire. Now, there's a temptation here because people like to name this fourth person. I will not name the fourth person. There are people that say this is Jesus himself. There are people that say this is an angel. There's people that say it's a heavenly messenger. I will say it is some type of heavenly being. We don't know. But the key isn't who it is. The key is what it is. Because that fourth being is a reminder that in the very place where they should have died, God was already there. God was already there waiting for them. No part of the story has this fourth being walking in with them. That being was already there. In church, sometimes we stumble. Sometimes we find ourselves in our own seasons of exile, and sometimes we find ourselves in places like a furnace, in the trials that we didn't ask for, in the trials that we can't see our way out of. This week, we were in North Carolina, and I was running the other day with my brother-in-law, Jeff, and we were talking about this passage. Jeff was struggling, and Jeff said to me, he said, John, I might need to just borrow your sermon because I don't know what I'm going to preach on. And so we started talking about it as we were going along, and then he shared with me where he wanted to go, and then I shared with him where I was planning on going, and I think we swapped. So Jeff's using my illustration, I'm using his today, because I liked his better for me, and then I think mine worked better for him. But we were talking, and Jeff asked me, he said, have you ever heard the song The Little Girl by John Michael Montgomery? Guys, I don't listen to a whole lot of country music. And so I said, no, I haven't. And so he starts telling me the song, and it is as country of a song as they come. It's about two parents who never took their child to church. And these two parents were non-believers, and the dad was an alcoholic, the mother was a drug addict. They never played with their child, they never spent time with her, they never gave her the hugs and the kisses that she deserved. And in those moments when it would get dark, in those moments when the rage would take over their home, she would hide behind the sofa. She would hide there, praying that something would change. And as you know, most country songs, they don't get better before they get worse. And so the story goes on that one night, her father's rage, the song literally says, like it always does, the bad just got worse. With every slap and every curse, until her daddy, in a drunk rage one night, used a gun on her mom and then took his own life. That's how the song goes. Well, the little girl moves away to another home, a home with a new mom and dad, and she is taken to church. And her very first Sunday at church, Dwight, you ready to cry? It's coming. Because I'm going to try to make it. These are the lyrics, the last two verses of the song. Her first day of Sunday school, the teacher walked in, and the small little girl stared at a picture of him. She said, "I know that man up there on that cross. I don't know his name, but I know him because he got off. Because he was the one there with me in my old house. And he held me close to his side as I hid behind our couch the night my parents died." And Nebuchadnezzar looked into the fire and said, "Didn't we put 3 people in there? Why is there a 4th? In the places in our lives that feel like exile, in the places that feel like furnaces, in the trials that we didn't ask for or we don't want to be in, and we don't see a way out, sometimes we forget. We forget that the God who commands our worship is also the God who accompanies our suffering. We forget that the God who calls us to stand never leaves us to stand alone. We forget that the fire may be real, but the presence of God is more real. The 4th figure in the fire is God's quiet announcement to his people. If you will remain faithful, you will never face flames without me. So today, as we close, where are you feeling that heat today? Where are you feeling that pressure to bow down to something that is not the living God? And where have you wondered if God is still with you? In the midst of your furnace, in the midst of your trials. Daniel 3 reminds us you can obey the first 2 commandments, even in exile, because the God who calls for your loyalty is also the God who steps into the fire with you. Stand firm, hold fast, and the one who walks beside you is the one who is in the flames with you. Today, in closing of our first day of Advent, the first Sunday of Advent, John's going to come and to remind us of what it is to live in exile, but also what it is to look for a hope and a future. A future that God is moving into. Today, I know that there are some of us that feel like we've been in exile, and we talked about it last week. But to also be reminded that in the midst of whatever it is we're facing, that there is a God who is beside us. There's a 4th person in that fire. There is a person who walks with us, who leads us, who guides us. And today, on this first Sunday of Advent, no matter how hopeless, how lost, how hurt we feel, to be reminded today, we are not alone. The miracle of the story is the story of a God who is with us. A God who went somewhere that no one else could even get close to, but who is there. Today, as we close, I'm going to ask Pastor James if he'll come down to this altar. If you would like to pray with the pastor, He would love the opportunity to pray with you. I will be down at this altar if you'd like to be anointed for healing today. But for some of us as we sing, we might just need to find a place to pray, a place to deal with our own fire, with our own furnace, with our own trials. And to be reminded of a God who says, I am the Lord your God. I'm with you. I have plans for you. Plans of hope and plans of beauty. May we hear those words of our God today. Let us stand as we sing.